Mikhail Haneke.
Michael Haneke.
Michael Haneke is an acclaimed award-winning Austrian director. I don't know which awards he's won, but I'm sure he's won a bunch. He's won an Oscar, I can tell you that. His directorial debut was in 1989, and he's been making films every few years ever since. He is pretty old though, so Happy End might have been his last, and it doesn't seem like he's in production for any other projects. Anyways, he's been making films for roughly 30 years. He's one of my all-time favorite directors, and I feel like not enough people are aware of his presence, and there's a good reason for that. All of his films from 1989 to 2005 is on the Criterion channel right now if you want to check that out, but they're definitely not for everyone. His films are cold, distant, slow, and disturbing, the opposite of what Grandma, who just saw Minions, is looking for in a film, or really anyone who is a human that is alive. He wants to be reminded of mundane tasks, depression, mass suicides, and mass shootings, all taking place in our first world lives. Unless you don't live in a first world country, you lucky bastard. So let's deep dive into Haneke's first film and his most mundane yet disturbing in his entire film catalog. The Seventh Continent was released in 1989 and tells the story of a middle-class family in Austria, or rather doesn't tell it. The film is about the inner workings of these characters that we, as the audience, only get an external, distant view of. For most of the film, we're treated with stationary shots of characters doing their routine tasks, and the parts of the film that aren't that are unpleasant and unsettling scenes, to say the very least. This film was much better for me on rewatch. Watching it the first time and then coming back to it 2 years later and knowing where the film was going, it flowed a lot nicer. It was a lot more entertaining this time, and I'm employing that word in a very different way than if I were to use the same word to describe something like Avengers Infinity War, or even something as gut-wrenching as Requiem for a Dream. This movie in particular is slow as hell, but it puts you in a state of hypnotism that I often find myself in while watching slow cinema. The term slow cinema is referring to movies such as Gendarmen, a riveting film where a woman drops a potato eventually. It's the concept of a film throwing out the traditions of using grand sets, fun and likable characters, and a story that's always pushing the protagonist. Now if you combine these elements with a brisk pace so that the audience doesn't feel like checking the time, then you got yourself a traditional piece of Hollywood tier cinema that will make Spielberg and J.J. Abrams cream their pants. Some classics that are products of traditional blockbusters are the original Star Wars movies, the Indiana Jones movies, and the Back to the Future movies. These are the polar opposites of Haneke's films, and in this case, The Seventh Continent couldn't be farther from these. Not to say that The Seventh Continent is undoubtedly superior. I especially adore The Empire Strikes Back and the first three Indiana Jones films more than this. I believe that The Seventh Continent, while being a pretty technically flawless film, isn't quite great, although I do respect it as a directorial debut as it establishes Haneke's abrasive style. I still feel like the writing of this film had a lot of improvement to make, which Haneke has greatly improved on over the many films he's written and directed afterwards. The film feels hollow, and I understand that that's intentional, but I don't think hollowness alone is what makes Haneke great, but we'll get to that with his later films. I found the third act of this to be so dark that it came off as try-hard and a little bit ridiculous. And the thing is that I might be wrong on this because Haneke loosely based this on a real-life news report. But for me it got to the point where it didn't feel like the characters were making the decisions, only Haneke himself. Seems like most people disagree with me on this, and I can't really say there's anything else wrong with the movie, so maybe you'll think it's better than I did. Although I think his next film is much easier to recommend. Benny's Video is Haneke's first great film. This is the movie that started many trademark Hanekeisms that weren't present in his last film, and echoes of which are seen in his later films. And taking that bit of career influence out, I think this is still a much superior movie to The Seventh Continent. The disturbing elements are so much more believable and hit harder for me. The story is more engaging, and the commentary and pure existence of the film connected with me a lot more. Here, all three main characters make disturbing and immoral choices at points, similar to The Seventh Continent, only way more believable. Whereas the shitty director would take the concept of a teenager detached from reality through the media he consumes and would make it preachy and stupid, Haneke knows how to portray it in the most realistic way possible. It's a film that could only come from him and nobody else. Another layer I found interesting was that you could see the movie being a prequel to the Austrian games. like this psychopath grew up to be this psychopath. I'm sure it wasn't intentional, but it's interesting to think about. It's another thing you'll learn about his films. He reuses the same actors and actresses time and time again. I'm paraphrasing here because I couldn't find the exact quote, but Haneke has stated that he does this so that the filming goes smoothly and that so he's confident that he can get great performances from every single actor and actress. Anyways, this movie's great and I don't really have anything bad to say about it. Now, I have no problem spoiling this movie because the movie spoils itself with this text at the beginning of the film. The film is not trying to be unexpected in its ending, and that's the point. It's taking away all the possible entertainment value of a mass shooting, yet in that way still manages to be entertaining. It even does this in the title. Is this not the most objective and robotic title ever? 71 fragments being 71 scenes, leading to an event that happens by chance. Even the title is so unique and perfectly displays the tone and themes of the film. I can't think of any other film like 71 fragments that wasn't made before it. It's extremely original and fits Haneke's style to a T. There's no protagonist, unless you want to say everyone's a protagonist. The film revolves around 4 mini-stories where only some of the characters get to interact with other characters of other plotlines. There's no cheesy last scene where they all meet up like the series finale of Lost or anything. Some of the characters just happen to end up where the shooting takes place. I really love the theme of coincidence that the film revolves around, and it's something I find myself thinking about way too often. And of course, this ping pong scene is absolutely legendary. So it's 1994, and your career has peaked. You're highly respected at Cannes, you got money, banging hookers left and right, and your films just get better and better. So I'm sure your next film will at least be good, right?